If you're not fast, you can't buy speed, but you can buy speed boots. You still won't be fast though. What's going on, guys? Josh from soccerreviewsforyou.com, bringing you a comparison video today between two of the best and certainly the most popular speed boots on the market, the Nike Mercurial Vapor 12 Elite and the Adidas X 18.1. Which one is better? What are the differences? That's what we're gonna be talking about in today's video. If you guys do end up enjoying the video, don't forget to support it with a like. And if you're new here watching for the first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. Also, if you guys are interested in either of these two boots for yourself, there will be two links down below in the description that'll take you to the review page for either the Vapor or the X on my website, where you'll find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick up either of them below their normal retail price. So if you're interested in some, go ahead and check out those links down below. Let's start with the main reason why so many people prefer to wear speed boots, and that is the weight. In a size 9.5 US, the Vapor 12 Elite weighs in at 6.6 ounces, whereas the Adidas X 18.1 in a size 9.5 US weighs in at 7.4 ounces. So you're talking about a weight difference of about 0.8 ounces between these two shoes, with the Mercurials being a little bit lighter. If I'm being 100% honest, the experience in regards to weight is not going to be that noticeable between them. They both feel very, very light, but because the Vapor is a tighter fitting shoe with a thinner upper overall, and I guess more structure to the shoe in general, it feels more connected and more responsive. That does make for a lighter feel in general, but if you're looking for a lightweight feel period, and you're not super picky about having the lightest possible boots, you're unlikely to have any issues with the X 18.1. They both feel very lightweight, so while the Vapor is technically lighter, I wouldn't say that there's a clear winner here. Next, let's talk about uppers, because there is a huge difference between these two shoes. The Vapor features a one-piece Flyknit upper, with the Flyknit material itself being very consistent in thickness across the entire foot, with no extra padding whatsoever. Between these and the X 18.1s, these are definitely a lot thinner and offer a more true barefoot sensation in terms of being very pingy, and again, just not having any extra padding to it whatsoever. Is this the thinnest Vapor that Nike has ever put out? Absolutely not. You're gonna get a thinner experience from the Nike Mercurial Vapor 11 or even the Vapor 10, those two models that came before this particular shoe. Even the Vapor 12 Pro is gonna feel slightly thinner than the Vapor 12 Elite. But either way, if you're looking for a premium barefoot feel, you're definitely gonna get it from this shoe. And because it is a knitted upper, especially after a little bit of wear time, it does end up with that sock-like sensation on your feet that is remarkably comfortable, considering that there isn't any padding and the shoe is as thin as it is. So if you're looking for a more pure barefoot experience, the Vapor definitely beats the X 18.1. The X features a one-piece upper predominantly constructed out of mesh, appropriately named Speed Mesh. Now, because it is a mesh-based synthetic, you're gonna find that this definitely has a much softer, more padded sensation versus that of the Mercurial Vapor 12. So in regards to having a barefoot feel, yes, it's thin, but it definitely has much more extra padding versus the Vapor, which has no extra padding whatsoever. So if you're looking for the more true barefoot experience, you'd probably prefer the Vapor over the X, but that's not to say that these are bad. They've actually added some extra padding on the inside liner from the forefoot forward inside of the shoe. So the touch on the ball, like I said, is thin, but it definitely has that little bit of extra padding to it, which not only feels very comfortable against your foot, but obviously does differ the overall touch on the ball as well. I would argue in a positive way, but ultimately that is a personal preference thing. Just like the Vapor, it does have a polyurethane top layer that feels pretty similar. I would argue that this is slightly grippier on the ball, although the difference is minimal. And as far as structure of the upper is concerned, this is definitely not as structured. It's definitely not as well reinforced. It's not as firm. Therefore, the shoe is not quite as responsive, even when you tie the laces tight. So if you're looking for the more responsive sensation, you're gonna get that more so from the Vapor rather than the X. Although I would argue out of the box comfort is going to be more comfortable with this shoe, given the more flexible, softer, more padded feel that you get from this particular upper. Something that will bother some people is the way they did the lacing system. It's not down the middle like the Mercurials. It's actually pushed to the medial side, which is an interesting choice. I find this personally very comfortable. The shoe seems to fit quite well. There is a little bit of crinkling happening here towards the top part of the tongue and along the sides, as you guys will see during the on-feet portion of the video. So again, in terms of how close this wraps your foot, it's not quite on the same level as the Mercurials, but as a whole, it fits nice, it feels comfortable, and the touch on the ball I really enjoyed. Sole plates and stud patterns, which one does it best? The Vapor 12 features what has been a fairly controversial sole plate design in that it's not a solid sole plate, it's a split sole, which basically means that the sole plate is inside the shoe, the upper wraps over top of the midfoot area, then you have two stud plates, one in the forefoot, one in the heel, to house the studs themselves. It's an anatomic shaped sole plate, meaning that it's not perfectly flat. It has little indentations, mainly in the forefoot and the heel, where you set in the sole plate rather than sitting directly on top, which does make a bigger difference in regards to giving you a more connected sensation to the shoe than you might expect. It's definitely, out of the two boots we're comparing here, the stiffer sole plate, especially out of the box. It does get more flexible as you wear it in, but overall, it's one of the best sole plates on the market in my opinion, especially if you're looking for that raw, connected, responsive sensation. As far as stud patterns go, the Mercurials have really been the industry standard as far as firm ground stud patterns go, which is what I have right here. It features all bladed studs that have this same chevron shape, obviously varying in size as well as angle, and even in length ever so slightly. If you're looking for the most aggressive traction on the market right now, quite simply, this is the stud pattern to have. So if you're talking about outright grip, this definitely beats out the X18.1. The X features what is now called a speed frame, used to be called the sprint frame. They really haven't changed all that much, which does include an external heel counter. I really like the look and feel of that in general, but the sole plate is a much more flexible plastic than what you're gonna find on the Vapor 12, especially out of the box. And as you break them in, they become that much more flexible. So that, along with the upper, definitely makes the X have a much more natural sensation on your feet versus the Vapor that has, like I said, a much more structure, slightly more rigid sensation to it, but in a good way. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the Vapor is too stiff. With this sole plate though, it's got really good flexibility in the forefoot, and there really isn't too much to get used to here. Nothing's gonna feel unusual about this. As far as the stud pattern is concerned, this is their firm ground stud pattern, which features the exact same layout we've been seeing from the Adidas brand basically since 2010. They really haven't had too much variation in this department, although this does feature a slightly modified stud pattern versus previous generation X models, where you're gonna find these conical shaped studs in the heel and more chevron style bladed studs that kind of look a little bit like what you'll find on the Mercurial, but obviously in the standard Adidas layout, and a layout that does differ quite a bit from those Mercurial Vapors. As far as traction is concerned, it doesn't feel too far off from other Adidas shoes given the layout being exactly the same, but I really like what they've done here with the slight variation in the shape of the studs. It does feel that little bit more aggressive than any of the other stud patterns we've had from the Adidas brand with this particular layout. I really like the way that it feels, and while it's not as aggressive as the Nike Mercurial Vapor 12 stud pattern, it definitely comes very, very close. On feet, these two boots could not be more different from each other. The Vapor has a very tight wrap around your foot, no extra space. The Flyknit upper is thinner with no extra padding to it whatsoever. It's got a more secure, locked-in sensation on your foot, meaning that the upper just feels a lot more structured in general. And then the feel underfoot is totally different as well. It's more structured, and it has that anatomic sole plate base that gives you a very connected sensation to the base of the shoe. With the X, it's almost the opposite, dare I say. It's wider, it's higher volume, it's certainly a much softer, more padded upper in comparison to the Vapor, which sounds like a better aspect, but again, personal preference is gonna be a key part there. And you're gonna notice that it doesn't fit your foot quite as closely. You're gonna end up with a lot more creases and crinkles in the upper. Obviously, that's something that's gonna vary from person to person, but just based on how closely it wraps your foot, it's nowhere near the same as what you're gonna find from the Mercurials. Also, the sole plate, completely different feel as well. It's much more natural, it's much more flexible, it's much more normal, I would say. But ultimately, the big difference between these two shoes is going to be the way that they fit and feel. So that, to me, is the most important deciding factor here. When it comes to fit, I think that both of these shoes are going to fit most people. The Mercurial has a reputation for being a much tighter, more narrow fitting shoe, but this latest generation is definitely wider than it has been in the last couple of years, especially if you're comparing it to the Vapor 11. So as long as you don't have super wide feet, these are going to fit most people. And of course, you have to like the feel of a tight fitting shoe, because even after break-in, they're still gonna fit very, very tight. Not much stretch out of the upper either, so keep that in mind. The X, definitely a much wider boot. Honestly, I feel like these will fit just about anybody. Even if you do have slightly wider feet, you're also gonna get a little bit more stretch out of the upper, given that it's just a much softer, less structured material in general. So they will stretch out a little bit after some wear time. So width-wise, definitely wider than the Mercurials, but both fit very well. I would argue that the Vapors fit a little bit better, but again, personal preference is going to be a key factor here because some people don't like a super tight fit, kind of including myself. As far as the sizing goes, both run the same in regards to sizing. Yes, the shape is different, but both run true to size. I'm wearing a size 9.5 in both of these shoes, and the fit and the length is pretty much perfect. So whether you're going X or Mercurial, I'd recommend going true to size for the best possible fit. But I think when it comes down to just straight up comfort, if you prefer a tighter, more raw fitting structured shoe on your feet, you're probably gonna prefer the Mercurials, whereas if you prefer something that's not quite as tight, is softer and more flexible and more padded on your feet, you're definitely going to prefer the feel of the X. So in conclusion, this is kind of a weird one because I think when you're talking about characteristics that define a speed boot, the Vapor 12 wins in pretty much every single category, at least on paper. It's lighter, it's thinner, it fits tighter, it has a more responsive sensation for sure, there's no arguing that. The anatomic sole plate in combination with the stud pattern also makes for more aggressive traction in general. It's more stable. It really is the pinnacle of what a speed boot can and should be. But that's not to say that the X18.1 isn't just as good. Yes, it doesn't fit quite as well, at least not on my feet. It's not nearly as thin. It doesn't provide as true of a barefoot sensation. It's not as light, and the traction isn't quite as good. But the experience that it has on offer, especially from a comfort standpoint, I think is top notch. So based on what I like in a boot, not just a speed boot, my pick between these two shoes, if I had to pick one to wear, would actually be the X18.1. I think the Vapor 12 is a better speed boot overall, but if you prefer something that is slightly softer, slightly more padded, slightly more natural in regards to how it feels on your feet, then you're probably going to prefer the X. Ultimately, it really comes down to what you want. There is no bad choice, but if I had to pick for myself, I would rather wear the X. Anyways, guys, that is it for my comparison. Hopefully you found that helpful and informative. If you did, be sure to support it with a like. If you have any questions or need any advice, still having a hard time making your decision, leave those questions down below in the comments and I'll do my best to get an answer out to you as soon as I possibly can. Subscribe if you haven't already for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. You can find all my social media information linked down below in the description as well. Other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.